Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. Across the country, combines have nosed into those first fields for the harvest of 2025, and producers are looking for answers on their yields. They're also looking for certainty when it comes to demand. Biofuel producers are no exception. Joining me now is Brian Jennings. He's the CEO and president of the American Coalition for Ethanol. And Brian, we've got a big harvest coming at us. How important can ethanol be as we get through these price levels?
Ethanol is critically important. We know that already today, ethanol provides demand for somewhere in the neighborhood, Mike, of 5 to 6 billion bushels of that corn. But as you indicated, as harvest begins, there's a lot of anxiety out there in rural America about this gigantic crop that we could be harvesting, the surpluses that could result from it. And we need to create demand drivers beyond what we have today. And we believe ethanol plays a critically important role in that.
When we're thinking about how much ethanol can drive demand for corn, we recently saw California take some big steps to add E15 to their fuel supply. That right there could demand more corn, wouldn't it?
It's huge. California continues to be by far the top gasoline user in the entire United States. And so by virtue of blending E15, what we could see is demand for ethanol go from about a billion and a half gallons today to north of 2 billion gallons in the state of California alone. So that's a critically important piece. California's been sort of the lone holdout when it comes to this, and so that's a good hurdle to overcome in terms of California.
Absolutely. We're glad to have them, the only state that wasn't authorizing E15, soon hopefully getting on board. But the rest of the country still faces challenges selling E15 in the summer months. Brian, what can we do to fix that? How can we drive more E15 sales year-round?
It really comes down to Congress meeting the moment, Mike. We've had bipartisan legislation to sort of deal with this antiquated regulation that prevents E15 from being sold year-round, pending in Congress for some time. As you and your viewers know, we came very, very close at the end of last year in the year-end spending bill. There are several must-pass pieces of legislation that Congress will take up. And if your viewers believe this is critically important, I'd encourage them to call Congress, insist that they get this E15 language over the finish line this fall.
Absolutely. Get it done. Let's have that certainty. Brian, speaking of certainty, we're currently waiting on updates to the Renewable Fuel Standard and the Renewable Volume Obligations. Specifically, what's the EPA going to do with these gallons that it says oil companies don't need to blend of biofuels? What are we hearing on that front?
Yeah, there's been a lot of litigation on small refinery exemptions, and so the Trump administration, based on that case law, has come out with a proposal to reallocate about 2 billion gallons from past small refinery waivers to the 2026 and 2027 Renewable Fuel Standard blending targets. We think that's a good approach to take. They're going to take comment on whether there are some other alternatives that they should follow. But essentially, we believe if a small refinery has been exempt from blending ethanol or biodiesel or renewable diesel, that those gallons ought to be reallocated to another refiner so the overall blending targets remain whole.
That's a great point. A law doesn't do much good if we're allowed to just have big holes in it. Brian Jennings, President and CEO of the American Coalition for Ethanol. If folks want to keep up on the ethanol industry, where would you send them for information?
They can go to ethanol.org, Mike.
Fantastic. Brian, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up with these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. Joining us this week to break down the commodity markets moves is Mike Miner. He's a risk manager with Professional Ag Marketing. And Mike, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me.
You know, the trade has now had a week to break down last week's USDA crop production and WASDE numbers. And Mike, at least on the corn side, the trade doesn't seem too bothered by this bigger corn crop.
Well, since putting in a low at the last August WASDE report, we've been able to build a nice uptrend here. And honestly, I thought the report was a little more sneaky bearish, Mike, than what the markets at least acted like.
Sneaky bearish, what do you mean?
I mean, from the idea that it's going to be harder for the USDA to take away acres than it will be demand at this point. So I think as we start to shrink this balance sheet, which I think is widely known at this point on the supply side, with yields coming in lower and this crop finishing faster than expected. And the USDA showed us that too in last week's report, dropping yield to 186.7 from that 188.8. So us shrinking that yield a little bit, I would argue that was expected. But that increase in acres, I think, really was just the notch that, like, before that, we could take demand down to kind of offset that balance sheet and keep us maybe below that 2 billion bushels, but not quite. And now with that increased acres, it's going to be difficult, I think, to drop the supply situation as fast as we probably would have liked to, Mike.
With that being the case, is this the time for growers to do anything with the bushels they need to market here ahead of harvest?
Yeah, I've really been focused on anything that we're trying to move at harvest time. So right around this gap, which we've continued to struggle to try to fill here through this entire week, right at last week's close, actually, I've been trying to be aggressive on if you have to try to move it at harvest, let's try to get it marketed. And then anything we've got in the bin going on beyond that, we can look at some carry opportunities down the road and maybe some extension type charting to try to give us some target points going forward, Mike.
That's a great point. Now, Mike, let's turn our focus over to soybeans. We continue to see no Chinese buyers coming into the soybean market. Prices have stayed relatively firm. How are you advising growers to handle that?
Yeah, Thursday we showed once again that we still have no China business in the export report. That's got to be concerning at some point. The USDA has been quite friendly, I would argue, with their WASDE reports up until this point. They have taken away about 130 million bushels on the export number is all since last May when they first posted it. So, and half that's been offset with an increase in crushing. So at this point, the USDA has been quite kind, I thought, based upon what they could have done with exports. Going forward on the soybean side, you're going to continue to see that battle. You're going to see crushing try to offset any loss that we have of exports to China. And we have some meetings coming up, at the end of this week that maybe we could get some nice trade talks to help things along. But at this point, they've been very vague about any details with this meeting. It was nice that they got a TikTok deal done just to show that the two can agree on something. But at this point, it seems like we may not be as urgent as what some believe we are when it comes to a China trade deal.
All right, might not see those big soybean sale headlines anytime soon. We'll be back for more with Mike Miner from Professional Ag Marketing after this. Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up with these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. Mike Miner of Professional Ag Marketing joins us this week for the commodity market breakdown. And Mike, you work with a lot of hog producers all across the Midwest. This hog market has shown incredible strength as we head into fall. What are you watching here in the nearbys for lean hogs?
Well, going back, I mean, we've been able to hold cutout around this 114 type level, 115 level for quite some time, which is going to be a win most years at this high level. So October had a little catch up to do. We had a nice little rally there on the October futures to narrow up that index to a more normal level. And now we're taking a little bit of break. You've seen 2 straight days that we saw cutout come in lower, Tuesday, Wednesday. And that kind of set things off a little bit, I think, just to have a nice corrective move. We had a massive rally for quite some time. Technically, we were overbought. At that point, going back, we saw that rally as we were underkilling the potential supply, and we were killing like 3% less hogs year over year. Now going forward, we're probably going to be closer to last year's levels. So a little bit more supply. We're getting out of the hole that we were in. And now you also at that same time frame have weights going up, especially on the producer end. You're going to be coming into some new crop corn, which will help. And you're also going to have weather changes, obviously, like we normally do. So we're probably increasing weights a little bit faster than what we normally would seasonally. But nonetheless, we're putting some more product back on this market, I think, Mike.
Mike, if you're watching for those weights to be growing here over the coming months, are you taking any moves right now to start hedging some of that winter or spring production?
Well, the nice part in this hog market is that, especially before corn started going up here, we had really nice crush opportunities, something where you could sell hogs, buy corn, buy meal, and lock in a potential margin. And we've had nice opportunities for the next 12 months for quite some time. And I feel like the producers have been aggressive at taking advantage of these crush opportunities, just given the landscape we were in back in 2023. They've been very well adversed with getting hedges on and trying to lock up potential profits on this go round just to try to build capital back up. And we haven't seen expansion yet, obviously. Inflation's just a hard one to get over. The cost of building's too much, etc. So we're going to need to build up a lot of capital and have some really good opportunities for quite some time to see any further expansion. But at this point, I think hog producers should be very happy, and risk management shouldn't be too far left behind at this point for these hog producers.
Great point, Mike. Looking over at the cattle market, we've seen it take a breath. I think we can say this past week. Were you surprised to see the pullback on live or feeder cattle last week?
Honestly, the pullback I was surprised by was cash. The last few times that we've been able to break the futures market lower, we weren't able to move cash prices lower. And over the past couple weeks there, we took off $5 a week in the cash market. Now this week undecided yet as we go into the end of the week, whether we're going to be steady or not, which is kind of the wait and game as we get towards the end of the week here. It looks like it's probably going to be steady-ish. I was just surprised this go round that we were able to break the cash market a little bit. The drop in cutout should be normal seasonally. The retailers are trying to boost prices higher to catch up to what cutout has done over the past couple months, but I think they're getting there. I think we're going to have high retail prices going into the end of the year. Now we'll just wait and see if the consumers will switch towards alternative meats or not, because they haven't yet.
They haven't yet. They've been buying that beef. Mike Miner, Professional Ag Marketing, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you, Mike.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead.
Our weather segment is brought to you by SprayTech, making your spray applications effective and convenient. Use it once, trust it always. Greg Solier has been keeping an eye on the agricultural weather across the country. And Greg, what do you anticipate for the folks up in the Pacific Northwest next week?
Well, the start of a parade of weather systems, as you would expect for the start of astronomical autumn in that part of the country. But I tell you, bone dry, 93% of those topsoil short and very short moisture-wise across Washington state. Really almost all the western states from the divide on westward, better than 50 or 60% short. So we've got some work to do. And here's the northern extent of still the hot dome of high pressure. Its eastern flank will generate a couple of showers and thunderstorms across parts of the spring grain areas. Boy, some nice rains over parts of the Dakotas southward into Nebraska last week. But this weather system offshore does move onshore, but nothing too impressive about moisture as the week wears on. With somewhat cooler air moving into the divide country out through the Bitterroot chain, there may be a couple of severe storms on the eastern flank of this trough moving across parts of the Dakotas, and hot weather relative to October across parts of Nebraska. Some dry time in the wake of those rains last week. Over the southwestern reaches of the country, would you believe it rained in San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Las Vegas. Obviously not big ag areas, but some of the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Prairie Valley's got some of the rain. This is the remnant circulation from Mario. We think there's still an El Nino going on. Don't tell anyone, but I tell you what, sure looks like it. Warmth across the plain states in the wake of last week's rainfall, and the combines and or planting vehicles will be moving on northward with winter wheat planting operations operations in mind. Still some scattered showers, thunderstorms. The monsoon set up over the southwestern part of the country. Hot for almost early October in the plains. And still, here's a circulation, Mike, with some rainy weather, would you believe, at this point in the summertime season into parts of California and the Southwest.
Now, does that action in the Southwest, is that going to throw any moisture up over the northern Corn Belt next week?
Not the northern Corn Belt, areas on south, but this is a slow-moving weather system that will bring some degree of rainfall in some of the worst drought areas. Boy, it's a world of hurt from Ohio to central Illinois and points on southward. The always juggling act of at least harvest versus getting moisture back in the ground this time of the year. So at least a few showers of the move from northwest to southeast into parts of the Corn Belt areas. There's another expanding area, hot dome of high pressure across this part of the country that will follow in the wake. So enjoy whatever rain you get. And if you do get some delays out there in those eastern Corn Belt areas, you'll move along quickly. Some of the more organized rains of late have been out through the western Corn Belt areas of Iowa and Nebraska. Meanwhile, high humidity across Texas. There's the eastern flank to some of that Pacific moisture and a couple of showers down through the lower Delta. Lots of dryness and drought related issues too across the mid-south, parts of the Cotton Belt and points on to the east as well. And a couple of showers and thunderstorms here. Warm, dry weather for outdoor work and planting across the central and south end of winter wheat. More tropical downpours in the southwestern part of the country, Mike.
Any drought relief coming for the eastern third of the United States, Greg?
Maybe a moral victory, a couple of showers around, but I tell you, it is extreme in some areas of New England, eastern Ohio, confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi on southward. We need more organization to the moisture, but it's an early and often start to the harvest season. Some delays from last week's rain into the western Corn Belt areas, and a couple of showers still linger eastern and southern parts of the Corn Belt. Enjoy it while you may, because there's back into another warm to hot extended spell of dry time as we welcome in October. Shower activity across the northeast and New England. That's welcome later on into the week. The tropics a little more active, but just really going to be where we just kind of exacerbate some of the ongoing shower activity across the Gulf Coast. The drought has been improved dramatically across Florida. Here's the system. Probably just, again, picks up the rainfall more or less into the southeastern part of the country. A little change, a feature here or there. Nothing really named. Some shower activity across the Piedmont, the Outer Banks as well, and points on westward. They had some pretty good rains across areas of the Mid-Atlantic region last week, and more hot weather and humidity down through Texas. Otherwise, scattered showers and thunderstorms across the Gulf Coast areas. Some opportunity for drought relief down there. We'll have the 4-week outlook coming up a little bit later on in the broadcast.
Closed captioning this week is brought to you by Farm Progress. Their team of experts reports on innovative solutions and essential information for your farm business. Visit farmprogress.com to stay updated. Well, when it comes to weed control, there's one recommendation I hear amongst all the others, or above all the others rather, and that's start clean and stay clean. It makes sense during the growing season, as we want those corn or soybean plants to not have to be competing against those weeds. But what about here? As we're getting later into the growing season, as harvest is approaching, is it still as important? Well, joining me now is Dennis Holland. He is a market development specialist with Corteva. And Dennis, thanks for taking the time to join us this week.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump into that question. At harvest time, do I still care that my fields are clean? Why does weed pressure matter at harvest?
So at harvest time, probably the biggest thing you want to watch for is your, what weeds are there, and really what they're going to do at this time of year is add to the seed bank. So as you're running your combine through your field and seeing those weeds as you ingest them into the combine, you're going to be spreading them back out the rear of the combine, and then that just adds to your weed seed bank for future years. So really, you want your weed control program to last season long and try to prevent as much weed growth as possible, so you're not creating more weed seed bank for following years.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Now, Dennis, as I've been on the road recently, I've seen some combines in corn really starting to run. And as you look at this corn crop, what are some of the major weeds that cause trouble at harvest time for growers?
I would say one of the biggest weeds across the state right now we're dealing with is just the amaranthus species, the pigweed, water hemp type species are probably the biggest issue right now in a lot of the fields. We do see, a few other weeds here and there, but pigweed and water hemp is kind of taking the main stage here for weeds that guys are worried about. And the reason why it's super important on those species to try to keep your fields clean as possible through harvest is, one plant can contain thousands of seeds. Those seeds can last for years in the soil. So that's why it's very important to try to either, have a herbicide program that keeps that field clean, and then do whatever you can to try to not pull those weeds into the machine as you're harvesting to prevent spreading the weed seed.
Now, if we've got folks, maybe they had a good herbicide program, but they had a couple escapes. As you mentioned, pigweed is a crazy crop. It's good at finding ways to get through farmers' defenses. If they see some out in the field before they run the combine, do you have any advice for dealing with it? Just pull it by hand?
Yeah, I mean, if there's few and far between, and there's some out there, if it's not too much trouble, I would certainly go out and try to pull them by hand and get them out of the field. The other tactics you can use that can be really helpful is, let's say if you had a wet area out in the field where maybe your stand got reduced, which can create, weed problem. If you can get to them areas with a machine and maybe mow them weeds down, mowing waterways, especially the edges, is a very good practice this time of year, so that, as you're harvesting along the edge of the field, you're not, accidentally pulling in some weeds from the waterways or from along fences and things like that.
Now, Dennis, are you hearing more concerns about morning glory bindweed here as we get towards harvest?
Yeah, I do hear more and more of that over the years. There's been some guys using some different treatments out there, trying to get that under control. Again, I think just using a good solid multi-mode of action weed control program will help in those situations too. And that's a tough situation at harvest time if you have those weeds out in your field, because that can really make it tough, especially in corn. That weed is a tough deal, and it can really tangle up into the harvest machinery. So really try to scout and figure out where those are at, and just be watchful of that weed, because that can create some harvest struggles.
Absolutely. It can slow you down, binding up, plugging up the header, creating challenges like that. And of course, Dennis, we've talked about corn and soybeans as well, but cotton harvest is also getting closer. Are there challenges cotton growers could face here with late season weed pressure?
Yeah, I think as we see harvest progressing across the United States, in the cotton country, I'm not as familiar with the cotton country, but again, they also are. It just seems like weed issues, when I'm talking to my counterparts, are just continuing to be more and more prevalent, and we have to be more and more diligent with our weed control programs. Starting those weed control programs as early as possible, good soil residuals, using overlapping residuals, and managing those weeds really before they emerge is the best way to have a good weed control program. Once the weed emerges, a lot of weed scientists will tell you've lost probably 80% of that battle. So getting those weeds when they're in the seedling stage, or when they're very small, they're very, very wimpy. They're easy to kill at that stage. So that's where you got to get after it and have success at those times.
And Dennis, it would seem like now, coming through harvest, noting where the challenging spots in the fields are, noting what weeds you're encountering in the fields, this would be the time to start planning for 2026, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. As you're harvesting, your soybeans, a lot of times, you're going to plant corn there next year. Understand what your weed species are, what's going on in that field, and you can kind of design or tailor a herbicide program to tackle those weeds. Same way as you're harvesting your corn, going to soybeans. In a lot of cases, once you make note of what the weeds are out there, and talk to your input provider on what you saw, and that'll help them be able to help you better in designing a weed control program for the specific weeds that you saw in your fields.
It sure can. Talk early, talk often to those experts you can lean on for advice. Dennis Holland, thank you so much for joining us here this week and talking about the weed challenges at harvest time.
Okay, you bet. Again, thanks for having me.
Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Pioneer. Plant with confidence. Plant the #1 corn and soybean seed of the U.S. Pioneer.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. A recent study by the National Renewable Energy Lab shows that biodiesel is one of the most quality fuels on the market. That's helping manufacturers start to use it in more of their lineup. And that growing demand is good news for soybean producers. Joining me now is Scott Fenwick. He serves as the technical director for Clean Fuels Alliance America. And Scott, tell us, what does this really show us about the biodiesel industry?
Yeah, this is actually our 8th annual biodiesel quality report. These reports are based upon monthly submitted certificates of analysis from each of the accredited BQ 9000 producers across North America that produce biodiesel. We help compile and redact sources when we statistically analyze the results for every parameter under the ASTM international specifications for biodiesel found in D6751, where we provide the average results and the statistical results for OEM review, regulator review for biodiesel quality today. These specifications are a worldwide benchmark for biodiesel quality, and this assessment proves that BQ 9000 producers today are consistently delivering fuel that performs even better than what's required in the marketplace.
That is fantastic news. And now that equipment manufacturers have this data in hand, how can they utilize more of the fuel?
Well, since many of the parameters tested are the same ones analyzed for diesel fuel, this gives those engine manufacturers, those vehicle manufacturers and fleets, they can review those results to compare against the fuel quality that they have experience with across the country. Our reports demonstrate a level of quality from biodiesel producers that well exceeds market expectations and the minimum performance requirements from the global specifications. This has led to several national fleets like PepsiCo, Estes Trucking, now using B100 or pure biodiesel and higher biodiesel blends within their national fleets.
Wow. I know at Farm Progress Show this year, John Deere announced that they will be supporting B30 or 30% biodiesel. How big of a milestone is that for the industry, Scott?
Yeah, that's really big. So John Deere has been a member of Clean Fuels Alliance America for a number of years. And as part of the technical program, we've worked very closely with them. But this was a little bit of a surprise to us as well. They wanted to do their own testing on the emissions after treatment of what they call Tier 4 engines. And those are engines and equipment produced since about 2011 and newer. And so John Deere actually approves B100 in their Tier 3 and older engines. So 2010 model year or older engines, John Deere actually approves up to B100 use in those. But for their newer engines with emission after treatment devices, they're comfortable now using B30 based upon our annual BQ 9000 reports, as well as the quality and feedback they're getting from farmers everywhere.
All right, Scott, now bring this home for us. How does this better quality fuel help demand for soybean growers?
Yeah, so soybean oil is our #1 feedstock here in the U.S. to produce biomass-based diesel fuel, both biodiesel, renewable diesel, and even now sustainable aviation fuels. So that higher demand for our fuels leads to higher demand for the feedstocks, which are today's farmers across America.
Scott Fenwick, Technical Director at Clean Fuel Alliance America, thanks for joining us with this update on biodiesel quality.
Thank you so much.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier returns now with his extended farm weather forecast for the country.
Our weather segment is brought to you by SprayTech, making your spray applications effective and convenient. Use it once, trust it always. Greg Solier's back with a look at what's to come over the next several weeks. And Greg, precipitation next week. Who's going to see it?
Well, maybe just enough to settle the dust and maybe idle the combines if you are so inclined over parts of the southern and eastern Corn Belt areas. The worst of expanding dryness and drought for now. Down here across the lower Ohio, into the Buckeye State, into the northeast, into New England. Get these tropical systems going. Think there's too much wind shear to get them really ramped up and wound up, but may increase rainfall across the Carolinas, down through the Cotton Belt country and parts of Texas as well. And look at the amounts here on what's left of Mario across the areas of the eastern Pacific. Downpours into parts of central California and southward. Mountain terrain areas, maybe 1 inch to 2 inches. Keep an eye on flash flood potential out there.
Greg, how do temperatures look as October comes into focus?
Anything but an October feel out there. Told you it wouldn't be lasting that cool spell we had a couple of weeks ago. 75, 80, 85 degree weather into parts of the plains and Corn Belt locales. Some cooling into the northeast of New England. Cloud cover and some tropical moisture here keeps temperatures a bit below average. The warmth all the way to the Pacific left coast, where into the northwestern part of the country and Big Sky country, the moisture is welcome. Look at the expanding opportunities for either winter wheat planting and or summer crop harvest across much of the heartland with some wetter weather conditions. Not bad news here in this part of the country with a tropical system. We'll keep an eye out for probably just increased rainfall chances into the Carolinas southward and through Florida.
How about the week of October 6th? Does it get any more fall-like?
Feels like more or less August 6th instead of October 6th here in this part of the country right here. Maybe readings into the 80s, maybe some record warmth expected. Some slight cooling Pacific Northwest. The warmth all the way down to the Rio Grande. Normal temperatures over the southeastern part of the country, and some of that warm ridging will extend into parts of the St. Lawrence River Valley. Moisture-wise, yeah, Pacific Northwest, that's okay. We'll get another feed of tropical moisture along the Divide country into the high plains areas, and dry time too, for opportunities for an early and often start and ongoing harvest season across the Corn Belt. Some tropical waves in through Florida, the eastern states with a tendency for a little above average moisture into that part of the country. And for the northeast of New England, that's not bad news at all.
Any big changes as we get into mid-October?
A little westward move on some of the heat back across the middle part of the country. Some cooling, if you will, but still above average temperature readings. Probably no sign of any significant frost or freeze anywhere except for maybe the northeast of New England. Eastern states normal on temperatures. Same across areas of Pacific Northwest and southern Canada. That weather pattern a little more active and maybe some opportunities to improve the soil moisture in the Pacific Northwest. Look at the dry time. Valleys of California across the heart of the winter wheat belt into much of the Corn Belt locales. Still a busier tropical pattern. No big winder-uppers, but will increase the rainfall opportunities across the Gulf Coast, Florida, and up and down the eastern seaboard with expectations of probably some pretty healthy rainfall totals and easing a drought in New England.
Our Farm Progress Update is sponsored by Brandt Industries. Lead the field with Brandt's lineup of heavy-duty grain carts and make the most of your harvest season. Visit brandt.ca for more. Well, it was another week without any soybean sales to China. The futures market hasn't taken much notice yet, but farmers in North Dakota sure have been impacted. Joining us now to talk about it is Sarah McNaughton-Peterson. She's the senior editor for Dakota Farmer. And Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So we're not selling too many soybeans over to China. A lot of those beans typically come out of North Dakota. So without those sales, what's happening on the ground up there?
Yeah, of course, the majority of our soybeans go out through the Pacific Northwest and go off to those Asian countries. But working with some of our soybean associations up here in North Dakota and our growers councils, they're actually doing some plans to send some bushels to some domestic processing plants here in the U.S. And so they're trying to find alternate avenues kind of to use those soybeans because the soybean harvest here is really close. There's a lot of farmers who don't know what they're going to do. Even one farmer here who got a letter from their local elevator saying that they weren't sure how many soybeans they'd be buying. And I mean, they offered her a pretty bad basis price just to take some of those beans off her hands. But luckily, that farmer had the storage, but it's not that way across the Midwest for all the farmers.
No, it certainly isn't. And you hear some of those basis figures up there in North Dakota, $1.50, $1.70 under the board. Those are big numbers. Sarah, in your conversation with growers, how are they reacting? How do they plan to make it through harvest?
So their kind of plan kind of was changing. It was very fluid. Everything's very flexible, but they're planning to sell some of their soybeans, store some of their soybeans, and just let their beef cattle herd kind of get them through the year. I know a lot of farmers up here in North Dakota and South Dakota are very diversified. And so they've got livestock on their operations, they got other crops, but the soybean piece is still a really big deal for those farmers too.
It is indeed. And I know you've been in contact with the folks at the American Soybean Association. Is there a light perhaps at the end of this tunnel?
Yeah, the light would be getting a trade deal set kind of with our big exporters. That's just kind of the biggest thing. And I know the ASA has been in a lot of conversations, and they're saying that this is a much more dire trade situation than it was in 2018. But they're hoping for a farm bill. They're hoping for some better trade deals. And then I think that's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel.
That makes a lot of sense. Trade deals and new domestic demand are kind of our ways out of this. Hopefully, we can do that soon for farmers across the country. Sarah McNaughton-Peterson, Senior Editor with Dakota Farmer. Thank you so much for joining us this week and for filling us in on some of those challenges that North Dakota soybean growers are facing this harvest season.
Thanks, Mike.
Now on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. In the Tractor Shed this weekend, machines that did heavy lifting back in the day, and they still are, literally. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Lundell Plastics. They have harvest products, planting products, industrial products, tough polyplastic products to make your machines work better. You can get one of their catalogs if you want to have one, to have them to hold, or you can order online, LundellPlastics.com. They have a lot of products to make augers work better. And that takes us right into auger season here in Max's Tractor Shed. Show me your auger tractor. Well, I show you two to begin with in Canada. First of all, this one is in Ontario, Canada, Moorfield, a couple of hours west of downtown Toronto, where Jason Heimpel has a Ford 5000. I believe it's hooked up to a Westfield auger there. Then let's go to the Prairie provinces at Pleasantdale, Saskatchewan. I think that's 120 miles or so north of Regina. Ryan Pedersen has a white tractor, a white 185, working out there at night out on the prairie. Let's go into the US of A now. Williston, North Dakota. Brian Larson has an IH 5488 right there doing its duty toward the end of international harvester production, the 5488. And in Minnesota, Andy Buckwalter uses an Alice Chalmers. He's at Mantorville, not too far from Rochester. It's an Alice 185 on the auger there. Another week we'll show you some more auger tractors at the Tractor Shed. We lead you to Mark Stock right now.
Well, hello, Max. We've got a busy week of auctions this week, and we start on Tuesday, September the 23rd, selling a 6.98 acre acreage north of Clarkson, Nebraska in Stanton County. Rural living at its finest. And then on Wednesday, September the 24th, over 1,500 items on BigIron.com. Some of the featured sellers include the Fordyce Farmers Cooperative from Fordyce, Nebraska, late model Case IH sprayers and Terragator fertilizer applicators and tender equipment, Stone Ridge Builds LLC from Edwards, Colorado, selling a JCB 506C telehandler, 2025 Giddy Up Extreme Cargo Enclosed 24-foot trailer. Kavanaugh Farms Inc. from Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, selling a 2019 John Deere 735 Hydroflex Draper Head, John Deere 6130D mechanical front tractor, John Deere 7730 mechanical front tractor. And Elias Stonehawker from Carmen, Oklahoma, will sell a John Deere 9520 four-wheel drive tractor, Steiger Cougar ST251 tractor, and a Case IH 1680 combine. And Max, we're fast approaching the deadline to get your auction listed in the fall catalog book. Call your Big Iron rep today.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Geringoff. Check out the new XFR 50 Draper with 3 times more flexibility than its closest competitor at Geringoff.com. Geringoff, proudly built in the American heartland. This week, we're getting to know Carly Vanderroost. She's serving as the Sentinel for the Michigan State FFA. And Carly, thanks so much for talking with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Did you grow up on a farm or in the countryside?
Yeah, so I grew up on about 50 acres of land. My family is a big hunting family, so I always did a lot of that. And then when we moved, I really got to experience more of the livestock side of everything and got really involved in equine science, and then recently learned how to show some pigs. So a lot of diversity within that.
That's outstanding. Now, let's talk a little bit about the role of the Sentinel. For folks who have never been in FFA, what is the role of the Sentinel?
Yeah, so the Sentinel, it's really a fun position. There's not a lot of serious matters that kind of go on like your treasurer or your reporter. I get to be the person that really greets everyone and make sure that everyone feels comfortable. I make sure the meeting room is always set up and just everyone's really having a fun time and we're able to get productive meetings done.
All right, keep things flowing. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And why did you want to serve at the state level for leadership in FFA, Carly?
So I just remember sitting in my first chapter meeting back at my home for my high school, and I remember seeing all these state officers and see what they really do, and I really wanted to be that person that I used to look up to when I was younger and be able to have that lasting impact on the people around me.
Fantastic. And now you get that chance, of course, going forward. Do you hope to make a career in agriculture?
Yeah, so I'm currently going to GRCC right now, but then hoping to transfer to MSU next year and get a degree in the animal science realm and kind of start going into a little bit more of the animal nutrition side of everything.
Oh, all right. Well, we wish you the best of luck. Carly, thanks for talking with us this week.
Thank you.
Well, harvest is a fantastic time to see all of the new ag technology at work in the field. And you can bet that our tech correspondent Chad Colby is not going to miss that opportunity. He joins us now with an update from the field.
As many of you have noticed, harvest is here. Farm show season is over, and for a lot of farmers, they're just getting started. This past week, I caught up with Unzicker Farms here near Morton, Illinois, right in the heart of Illinois, as they were in their first field of corn. I believe Chad told me, though, they did a little beans over the weekend.
We did, actually. So on Saturday afternoon, we tried beans a little bit just because we had some that were ready to go. Early planted, mid-April planted beans, and got those out and started on corn Monday afternoon. We've had a few neighbors that have been going for several days prior to that, so we're definitely getting a good start here in the central Illinois area.
You know, Chad, the first question everybody asks is what's the moisture on corn? With the unseasonably warm weather, looks to me like a lot of corn has been drying down a lot faster maybe than guys expected.
It has dried a lot faster than expected. Usually when we start with harvest, typically most falls it's in that 25 to 28% range. This stuff we've seen this year so far has been anywhere that 22 to 23, even down to the 20, 19 range as well on harvest moisture on corn. So a lot drier than we thought, but also June and July had the hottest nights on record, the top 4 hottest nights on record for temperature-wise in our area. So the plant really dried down very fast, and so did the grain as well.
I heard some guys, you know, everybody's talking about yields, and I know in southern Illinois, pretty disappointed because of that heat. Really took a lot of the yield off. Here, I would say your yields are average to above average. Is that what you're thinking, Chad?
So far, we're off to a good start this year. I'd say, yeah, yields are average to above average. The year we had last year, it's really hard to repeat that again. That was a record year for most people in our area and in our state, but we're still thankful for the crop we're seeing so far out here.
Well, Chad, I appreciate you taking some time. It's always nice to get in that first field of corn. You can't finish harvest until you get started, and for a lot of guys in the Midwest, they got in the field for the first time this week. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad, for that update. And of course, everyone stay safe this harvest season once those combines start rolling. And stick around. We'll be back for more with Greg Sollier, ag meteorologist. He's going to take a look at what's to come in the fall and the winter of this year. Well, harvest is off to a pretty smooth start for many growers across the country, but will it stay that way? And then how's winter going to look? Well, Greg Sollier is already taking a look at all of that, and he joins us now. Greg, we walked through October earlier in the show here, the first half. How does the second half of October look like it's shaking out?
Well, really no sign of any true autumn air or autumn weather. The back end of October is still featuring some sense of that weakening warm ridge of high pressure. We think by then we're finally moving into a neutral state. Temperatures of the open waters of the Central Pacific finally getting back to normal. We think there's still a weak El Nino going on. And into the northeast of New England, a little slot to some cooler air on the move. And from a moisture standpoint, very little. So yeah, if you do get delays, you'll be back at it. The only real active weather, we'll keep an eye on the western Atlantic with a couple of tropical systems enhancing rainfall here and a ribbon of active weather along the southern periphery. Some cool air from the Pacific Northwest into the northern Great Lakes and much needed moisture for the northeast of New England.
Do you see any spreading cool weather by the time we get to November?
Into November, not much to speak of, and relative to the time of year, above average temperatures from the southern plains into much much of the Corn Belt locales. The cool air begins to make its move across the northern tier of states. We're still in some semblance of a neutral, balanced state to the ocean waters and the atmosphere. And from a moisture standpoint, beginning to pick it up with some troughiness over the middle part of the country. Much needed moisture, lower Mississippi Valley, much of the Corn Belt into the eastern states. So if you're not really, ahead of the game here, there'll be probably some delays, especially as we move on through the mid to late stretches of the month of November. We're still beginning to pick up near the Canadian border, and moisture too for the northwestern reaches of the country.
Now, December, of course, winter is underway. Greg, does it feel like winter?
In some areas, that cool air begins to dislodge. We'll get a pretty good lobe of it from time to time into the northeast of New England. Temps will vary from a little above to a little below, but nothing too extreme. Big sky country into the Carolinas with still some sense of late season warmth over the southwestern reaches of the country. And the moisture, too, again, favoring the northern and eastern Corn Belt areas, the northeast of New England, down through parts of the Cotton Belt country. Meanwhile, normal moisture for the Mississippi Valley into the Pacific Northwest. Back into dry weather for the southwest and southern plains. So again, the deeper into autumn and early winter we go, hopefully you're done with harvest operations.
Absolutely. What about midwinter? We get to January. Greg, how's it look?
Beginning to ramp up here. Here's a look at temperatures. Look at the range from well below average up into the southern Canadian prairie. Some warmth over the middle part of the country. On southward, it's a weak La Nina getting going here and strengthening with time. And so it goes with an active, more typical January setup of moisture Pacific Northwest, middle part of the country into the northeast and New England.
I know February's a long way off, Greg.
Yes.
We'll talk again before then, but
Obviously.
how's it look now?
Here we go with, again, this setup here. So going to be a busy one, character building. That's the early thinking here with a weak La Nina strengthening, a short-lived one, but the cold air pretty much dominant and built into the northern plains all the way down into the Rio Grande, the Gulf Coast areas, into the eastern states. And when you get that range of temperatures and a jet stream pattern swinging in from the Pacific Northwest to the southern plains into the northeast of New England, tends to be a pretty active one, probably more significant moisture for the northwest, the high plains areas across much of the Corn Belt locales. It'll be character building. Make sure you're ready to go with livestock operations, certainly feed requirements as well, and plenty of wet weather with severe weather expected as well across much of the Gulf Coast area. We'll keep you up to date here in the days and weeks to come.
All right, Greg, and of course you keep folks up to date on the Feedstuffs 365 podcast twice a week. Folks should get on there and check that out. And folks, thank you for joining us this week. Be sure to catch us next time right here for This Week in Agribusiness. This Week in Agribusiness is recorded in the Strauss Studios. For more than 70 years and 3 generations, Strauss has been manufacturing high-performance German-engineered workwear, work boots, and safety equipment. Prepare for the next growing season at Strauss.com.
This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.